Hello and welcome to Note Doctors Summer Shorts. My name is Paul.
My name is Jen.
My name is Ben.
And we are your hosts. We are all university music theory instructors who are passionate about music theory and music theory instruction. In these short episodes, we will be sharing with each other and all of you musical examples and teaching tips covering a wide range of topics. So if you want to know more about music theory and the most effective and innovative ways to teach it, this is the podcast for you. Hello and welcome back to Note Doctors, a music theory and pedagogy podcast. This is our second summer short for the summer of 2024, and this is a bit of an unusual episode, actually the first of its kind, because I am flying solo on this episode. Jen and Ben are not with me, don't worry, this is just a one-episode hiatus. They will be back, but they are traveling around, and I'll be traveling later this summer, but we wanted to keep our episodes coming out this summer, so I thought we'd do this short little episode because it was requested by a listener when we were at the Pedagogy into Practice conference. Someone mentioned how we could do a little summer short on our theme music. Little analysis of the theme song that I'm sure has been stuck in your head since 2020. It has been stuck in my head since 2020 at least. And who better to talk about it than me, since I was the one who came up with it. So we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive into this theme song. So if you've ever wanted to really analyze a podcast theme show song, this is the podcast for you. Before we get into that, though, I do want to mention our sponsor. So we are honored to be sponsored this year by the Texas Women's University School of the Arts and Design. That's where I work. It's an amazing place. The School of the Arts and Design is made up of 5 different divisions. We have music, fashion, theater, dance, and visual arts. And it's through an internal grant that they are supporting us this coming year. And so we thank them so much and really appreciate that support. So let's dig into this theme song. So I did mention that I wrote this, but actually I didn't come up with the first 2 bars. J.S. Bach did. As many of you probably noted, that is the beginning of the C major fugue from the Well-Tempered Clavier by J.S. Bach. And as a pianist, that is the collection of music that we all learn at least 1 or 2 fugues in our lifetime. And, thinking about when we started this podcast back in 2020, we wanted to talk about expanding the repertoire and learning about new ideas, but of course we're also tied to this tradition, this very rich tradition of Western art music. And so we thought about, what this theme could be. Well, it seems like Bach is a good place to start because, for better or for worse, Bach is at the centerpiece of so much of Western art music and the music theory that we study in at least in the United States. And so starting off with that little subject, and so it's the subject for his C major fugue, and we can hear it here, and I think I can play it. Okay, so that was the subject of his fugue, and then his answer. And so, as most of you all know, the answer comes in the dominant, and so we start in C major, but in measure 3, we move to the key of G major. We have the introduction of an F sharp into the music, so we are in the land of G. And that's how the theme starts for Note Doctors. And up until measure 3, it's all just J.S. Bach, and then I think a little synthy sound in the background. But then in measure 3, we get something different. So as I play this theme again, notice how in measure 3, we are implying this D7 chord, or a 5-7 in the key of G. So listen again for that. So notice that whole third measure is this 5-7 harmony. And then the downbeat of measure 4, we get our G and a B. So that is our G chord, and that's the key that we feel in. And so when we get to the theme, we have the first of the episode, we have that opening gesture from Bach, that subject, and we have that rising line that goes to our C, and we get, instead of this beautiful counterpoint, we just get this chord, which is this, which is a D7 chord in second inversion. So we have an A, C, D, F sharp. So a nice tightly voiced 7th chord. All right, and then we have that C on the top. Now, Bach would then probably resolve that as that way, right? But since this podcast is all about looking towards the future, we're not going to do what Bach does. We're going to do something different. And we get a lot more ambiguous. I was actually analyzing this earlier today, and I was like, wow, this is quite an ambiguous theme song, if I do say so myself. Because instead of getting that G chord, we get this. We get this. So we get from this D7 to a B flat major 9 chord with the 7th in the bass. So we have A, B flat, C, D, F. And then it goes back to D7. What do we do with that? Well, if we think about that D7 chord as a dominant functioning chord, we would anticipate that D7 to resolve to either a G major or a G minor chord, but certainly not a B flat major 9 chord. Now, B flat major 9 does live in the land of G minor. That would be the 3 chord in the key of G minor, but does not live in the key of G major, which we would most likely anticipate if we were starting in the key of C. We'd be going to the dominant, or the major 5, not the minor 5. We could perhaps think of this as some type of deceptive resolution, as D7 resolving to B flat is certainly a surprise, and I think most of us would feel deceived when we hear that, but it's not a typical deceptive resolution, as the B flat chord is the 3, or the flat 3, depending on if we're thinking in major or minor, not the 6, which is the most normal deceptive resolution that we have. The tricky thing with this whole thing is that it just loops between these two chords. And the thing is that D7 does not function how we normally anticipate a D7 to go. So instead of thinking about this tonally, we can also think about just the voice leading, how this is working. And so we have this D7 chord moving to this B flat major 9 chord. And the cool thing about those two chords is that they share 3 pitches. An A, C, and a D are all in those two chords. And the only two changing voices are here. We have a F sharp down to an F, and then we have this addition of a B flat. And so we have this. So that F sharp, instead of resolving out, like Bach would do, we have it actually resolving down to this crunchy, awesome sounding chord on this fake Fender Rhodes keyboard sound that I have in front of me. And so it's ambiguous, but we can use Neo-Riemannian theory because we have actually a move to the chromatic median from D down to B flat. And so if we just take just the triads of those two chords, D and B flat, we can see that this is actually just a PL transformation if we want to think about Neo-Riemannian theory. So if we start with a D major chord, if we take it to the parallel, so make D minor, and then we have an L transformation, which takes the A up a half step like a leading tone, we get B flat. If you've heard that in Avengers or a superhero movie, that's what it is. A D major chord to a B flat major chord. So it's basically like a 1 to a flat 6. But because of the shared tones, we have a really smooth voice leading, and it sounds great. I love it. And if you really like those types of chords, check out John Adams. He does it all the time, especially in his opera operas, or really anything. But if you want to check out a piece of his, This is Prophetic from Nixon in China, uses a lot of these types of transformations in his music. And so that's a bit about the harmony, and it leaves some question marks about what key are we even in? Are we really in G at all, right? Are we in D? Well, let's see if we can figure that out by looking at the next layer. So the next voice that comes in the theme is our bass line. And I love groovy chromatic bass lines. I was kind of inspired by the theme for the 1970s TV show Barney Miller, if any of you know Barney Miller, and that kind of goes like this. So it's a super funky bass line. That's just the beginning of the theme of the show. It's super awesome, super funky, and I love that bass line so much. And so I thought, well, what if I do some type of funky chromatic bass line in this? Would that work over these two chords? And so we get this. All right, so you can see there's a clear motive going on, this anacrusis that happens 2 times that leads us to the downbeat. But a couple interesting things to note is that our first note on the downbeat is this octave jump of a C. If we recall, what chord is being voiced above that is our D7 chord. So the 7th is actually of that chord is what we hear first, which is super funky and wild. And normally we would anticipate that C to resolve down, right? Because, theory students all know that a chordal 7th resolves down, but this chordal 7th does not resolve down. It resolves up to a D, right? Which makes this D7 chord not sound dominant because we're not resolving the chordal 7th the way we anticipate it to. It also helps to kind of solidify perhaps the idea that maybe we're actually in D major or D mixolydian, that C is now just, a tone that can be just as stable as any other note. We get the resolution to the root of our chord on the and of 2. And then we have a climb up to F where a chord changes to the B flat major 9 chord. So here we get kind of that F is like the 5th of our B flat major 9 chord that then goes up to a G, and then it repeats. So it's a cool funky bass line. One thing to kind of note is that with our first chord, it's that second note of the bass line that is actually the root of our chord. Right here, that D is the stable note. But if we look at the next measure and apply that same logic, that would mean that our second note, that G, is actually the root of our chord, which would turn our B flat major 9 chord actually into a G minor 7th with a 9th and 11th also on it, which then, sorry, I'm starting to really nerd out here, puts into question perhaps we're actually in the key of G minor, which would make a little more sense thinking about being originally in the key of C and then moving to the dominant, but instead of the major dominant, we're in the minor 5. All right, so perhaps that D7 is just really a 5/7 of G, but instead of G major, it's a G minor. Something to think about. I'm not sure which one is right, and I'm not sure which one is most convincing, but it's ambiguous. So that's our chords. That's our bass line. So now let's talk about the melody. Now the melody is taken from the original, now up a whole step. So instead of being in C, now we're up into D. Okay, which gives some strength to our idea that perhaps we're actually in some type of key of D, D major-ish, because we have Do, Re, Mi, Fa, which are the same 7 notes of our Bach subject, just up a whole step, until we get to the last note of that measure, that B flat, which kind of anticipates the B flat chord that comes right after that on the downbeat, and also puts into question, are we in D major? Are we in a mode? Something like that. And if we were to take all the notes in our theme here, if we were to line them up, we get this scale. All right, so it's not major, it's not minor, it's not even a diatonic mode. So the best way of describing it, at least to me, is to think about this being actually the fifth mode of our melodic minor scale. So we have a D, E, F sharp, G, A, B flat, C, D. So if we think about D as the fifth of our G melodic minor scale, so here's our G melodic minor scale. You notice how it has like a little bit of a minor feel at the start, but then at the end, it sounds like we're in major. Right? So it has this kind of dual identity going on. But instead of starting on a G, we're just going to start on a D and play those same notes from our G melodic minor scale, and we get this. So notice it sounds kind of major, but also kind of sounds Dorian in a way, because not Dorian, but Aeolian. So we have that flat 6 and flat 7. You might see this scale referred to as a Mixolydian flat 6 scale. So Mixolydian is, of course, major with a flat 7. But if you put the flat 6, you get the notes that we have in this melody. So when we look at the theme and how it's presented the first time, it has this kind of arch shape. We go up and then we go back down. We actually pass where we start. These kind of descending fifths. And here we have a nice kind of A, then back to D. So again, giving us this idea that perhaps D is actually our home. I have a nice kind of so-do kind of implied movement in our melody. The second time that theme is presented, the shape of the line changes a little bit. Notice that instead of going down to the D, so this is a little trick that I learned from studying John Williams scores, because he does this all the time to great effect. The first time we go down from A to D. The second time we go to that A and we go up to the D. There's that ascent up to the D, which gives the melody a whole different life to it. Even though it's the exact same note that we heard the first time through, it's just an octave higher. It creates some excitement, I think, and kind of pushes us over the edge. And then it kind of ends again, implying that fifth mode of the melodic minor scale with a C natural, and then that B flat, so that flat 6 and that flat 7, before ending on an A, which again implies the 5, or the fifth scale degree of our D scale. And then the theme is presented again just with thirds harmonizing it. Because thirds are consonant, they sound great. And again, harmonizing using the notes from that fifth mode of the melodic minor scale. When we first hear this theme, it always ends on this B flat major 9 chord, which leaves us feeling like we need resolution. It's not a half cadence in the traditional sense, it's not a 5 chord, but it certainly leaves us in suspense or wanting some type of resolution. But of course that's necessary to do, because we want you to keep listening to the rest of the episode. But if you've ever listened to the very end of an episode, you know that there is a cadence, and I'll play it for you. So this is the very end. So I'm outing anyone who's never listened to the end of an episode to hear this, but this is actually what happens at the very end. So we get the end of our theme. Let me see if I can play it. So we actually get a cadence in the key of D major. So the melody is modified slightly. Instead of going like this, where we have that B flat kind of as an upper neighbor, we have a different note. So we have kind of a le, fa, so going on in the melody. and a nice D major triad. So in the end, what key are we in? Are we in G minor? Are we in D something? It seems like we are in the key of D major after all. So that's basically how the theme works as far as its main themes and harmony goes. During Christmas time, we also like to put a little sleigh bells and glockenspiel on there. And then, of course, for summer shorts, we like to kick the tempo up a bit and bring in some electric guitars and more synths because we're all having a good time because it's summer. But basically, the bones are the same in each of those versions. So if you thought I was way off on this analysis or maybe missed something, should have noted something, you can always email us at notedoctorspodcast@gmail.com. And we will be back with more summer shorts in the coming weeks. We are going to do our second ever book club where we're going to be reading together What the Best College Teachers Do by Ken Bain. It is a classic and has a ton of wisdom and best practices and is a great book to read over the summer to get you all excited to teach in the fall. And we'll talk to you then.